What's going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. It is wintertime. That means it's time for big bass. One of my personal favorite techniques, one of the all-time classic successful techniques to catch really big bass is going to be a jig. So today we're going to talk to you guys about how to fish a jig in the winter for big bass. Man, like we said, it's one of my favorite techniques, and it's just been proven to catch the really big bass in the wintertime. I think if you've been around the bass fishing world much, you've researched it much, or looked into bass fishing much, studied it, I guess I would say, you've seen people talk about how jigs just catch bigger fish. And they do, and also they shine in the winter. Now, let's talk about why does a jig shine in the winter? Well, it's something I like to call movement without movement, which is also a big fish thing. A lot of big fish baits create what I call movement without movement. That means if you've got a big line through swim bait, it's going through the water at this pace right here. But the tail's a lot of movement without much movement. You know, hollow body frog's known to catch a big bass, kind of big fish technique. It'll sit there and go back and forth and not move forward very much. Well, a jig is the ultimate example of that. And in the wintertime when things slow down, well, that's when you really need it. Even when a jig is sitting dead still on the bottom, and you've got a crawfish type trailer on there, similar to this right here. I mean, this is just an old custom made crawl out of a garage, but there's a bunch of different crawls you can use. But basically those crawls are going to sit there. That jig is going to prop that crawl up a little bit, and that crawl bait is going to be moving just a little bit. That jig skirt's going to be pulsing with any kind of water current. It's calm in this corner right there, right here, but if you go right out there where the water ripple is, just that little water ripple is going to be enough to make that jig skirt sit there and pulse in and out, even as it sits still in the bottom of the lake. So you're going to have movement. Every time that jig hits, everything kind of unfolds and moves and collapses and keeps doing that in a rebound type of deal. So jigs have a lot of movement without any forward movement at all, if you want them to. So I think that has a lot to do with why jigs are so successful. There's also something falling, hitting, and going like this. Man, that is a defensive posture, that there's something in a bass being, you know, the alpha predator that it is, apex predator, I should say, that it is in these water systems that we fish. Man, there is something to that defensive posture, that fall to the ground fast, open up, spread out, look defensive. That just bothers a bass. And they can't stand it. They kind of have to, almost instinctually, have to bite that bait when it does that. And it just so happens that right now we've been working on developing a jig that I'm helping design for a new company that's going to be launching here in the next month or so. And this jig's going to be called the Versa Jig. It's going to be by a company called Bass Amigos. It's going to be a brand new company based out of Texas. But I've actually been fortunate enough to get to work with this company from day one, or before day one even, and got to help design this jig. I've designed this jig. So today, my whole purpose coming out on the lake today is really not even to catch anything. It would be a tough day to catch anything. We've got extreme cold trending water. We've had the coldest stretch of nights that we've had all season. I would say all year, but the year just started a couple days ago technically, but you know what I mean, all winter season. So it would be a very tough day to go out here and try to actually catch fish on this jig. That's not really what my goal today. Today is my goal to go out and put this jig in the nastiest and heaviest cover that I can find and see how our head design works coming through that cover. But I thought while I was doing that, I might as well sit down, film this little video, and give you guys some tips on how to fish a jig in the wintertime. The main mistake I see people make with a jig, especially in the wintertime, is imparting too much action. You don't need to impart any action. You don't need to manipulate the bait with your hands or do anything in the retrieve to trigger bites in the winter. Now, the main thing is, what I like to do is I like to let the cover and the ground, the structure, impart the action onto the bait for me. So what I mean by that is I like to fish this jig. My favorite place is creek channel bends on Lake Fork that have the steep drop-offs, and right where there's a standing piece of timber, there'll be a root system exposed over the edge of that creek channel at the base of it. I like to get my jig in there, crawl it through the timber, and then let it fall. So as my jig comes through the root system, it'll kind of catch right here and hang, and then as I slide it over, when it gets right here, it falls straight down. And that is the mistake I see people make, trying to hop a jig or trying to give it a little shimmy shake or anything like that to impart it. Don't do that. The best action you can put on a jig to get bites is that it's here, it's not moving, it's hardly moving at all, then all of a sudden the bottom drops out and it falls. That's where you get, in my experience, 99 for like almost every one of your bites on a jig comes as it's falling off of something. A lot of times it's on the initial fall. We've all experienced that, I'm sure, if you fished one very much. But when you get in brush or you get in rock, it catches and pops off and falls. That fall, we all know if you fish a jig very much, that's where you get the majority of your bites. It is certainly where you get your really big bites most of the time. It's because it is a reaction. That fish is sitting there, this jig is above it, it's looking at it, it's kind of creeping through, and also that jig is flying right at their face or right in front of their face, and they snap at it. And when you think of wintertime fishing, people may tell you, well, you get soft, mushy bites in the winter. Not this one. No, this sucker right here will rattle the guides on your rod when they hit it. It's an incredible bite. It's a lot of fun to feel that bite because it is so violent. But it's that sudden change of direction, that sudden drop, not only triggers a bite, but triggers violent bites. They get the whole jig 90% of the time. As soon as you feel a thump, reel down and swing. You don't have to check up and make sure they got it on this deal. When they bite it, man, it's hard, and you just go ahead and swing right then. You usually got them. So make sure as you're going along fishing jig, number one, get around the right type of cover, get around rock, get around brush piles, get around root systems. And then number two, don't put any extra action on the bait. Let the structure, let the cover put that action on there. And I bet that tip alone right there make your bites in the wintertime go up on a jig. Be patient, be slow. When it starts to fall, make sure that you're dropping your rod tip, and we'll go over that here a little bit later and show you an example. Make sure you're dropping your rod tip a little bit so that that bait gets to fall on semi-slack line and really zip down into their face. The next tip that I will give you, and this is the most important part of this video, Denny Brauer is maybe the best jig fisherman of all time. Mark Pack from Lake Fork, God rest his soul, passed away a couple years back now. He was maybe the best jig fisherman on Lake Fork. He certainly was one of the best jig fishermen on Lake Fork in all of East Texas. And Mark told this to me when Mark fished out on the touring trail. He learned this from Denny Brauer. Always throw a 3/4 1 ounce jig. Half ounce is the most popular weight. I've caught a bunch of fish on half ounce over the years, but since I made the switch based on Mark Pack's suggestion to me, to switch over to 3/4 ounce jigs at the smaller size of my weight range, man, my consistency with the jig and my number of bites is gone way up. And why do you think that is? Well, that is because if we're depending on the fall to create a reaction bite, the heavier the jig, the faster the fall, the more reaction bites you're going to get and the better reaction bites you're going to get. So that is the number one tip of this video, is to go off the beaten path a little bit. Don't use the half ounce and 3/8 ounce jigs that most people use. Listen, if that's what you use and you believe in it, you have confidence. That's the most important part of fishing, is confidence. So if you have confidence in the half ounce jig, use the half ounce jig. But if you're looking to get better at jig fishing, try that 3/4 ounce or even a 1 ounce deal. For what I fish, I prefer the 3/4 ounce because to me, just when you get to a 1 ounce jig, the head starts getting bigger and bulkier, and I'm fishing it through some gnarly cover with those root systems and brush piles that I like to fish it in. And so that creates a situation where the head gets wedged more often on a 1 ounce than it does on a 3/4 ounce. And it does get wedged a little more often on a 3/4 ounce versus a half ounce, but I do have a really cool trick to get that through there to keep your jig unhung. We're gonna show y'all that later in today's video as well. So let's go out here and do a little bit of fishing. We're gonna go fish some brush piles today. We're gonna fish some really like thick, heavy brush piles that I've got a lot of jigs that are hung up in them right now. We're going to try this new one and see if we can keep it going through there clean and good. And then let's also go fish some really big, nasty, gnarly, square-edged rock. They're actually concrete chunks of rock that have square edges, which makes it a nightmare to get a bait through, especially a jig. We're going to see if this new prototype jig head will go through that cover really well. And we're also going to give you some tips and techniques on how we get that bait through there and how we present it to the fish along the way. We'll show y'all some old clips, some old footage of us catching jig fish along the way like we have been as well. All right, so let's go over the proper way to fish this jig through a brush pile. Now this could be a root system. Missed my cast a little bit there. This could be a root system or a brush pile. Root system is basically a brush pile at the bottom of the tree, and it's exposed because of water current running over it through the years. We fish a lot of root systems out at the bottom of the standing timber on Lake Fork and other East Texas lakes. But root piles, for all essential purpose as far as how you fish through them technique-wise, are the exact same thing as brush pile. Right here we've got a little bit of a creek channel drop-off. We've got a brush pile sitting on the edge of it. So we're going to throw our jig out there It's important to get it online. I use Humminbird 360 to get it online. It just makes things easier. We used to side scan them, waypoint them, and then do them like that. You can do them like that too. That's a little more complicated. Humminbird 360 makes it faster and easier to line your brush piles up. So make sure the alignment is right to hit the brush pile or the root system that you're trying to hit. And really, what I like to do is, like we talked about earlier, you know, the bites come on the fall. That's when most of your jig bites come. I like to create as many falls within a cast as I can, so I'm going to drag the jig real slow. Today it's super easy. We got no wind, so you can see I'm just dragging the rod in a straight upward position. That's going to maximize my ability to feel everything that's going on with that jig. But if the wind is blowing, let's say the wind was blowing this way or the wind was blowing, you can see my jig. Okay, here's, pause for a second. So here's a good lesson. So if we can pan up towards the rod tip, if you can look real close, you'll see my rod tip bending and loading a little bit. My jig is in that brush right now. So all I want to do right here is gently keep dragging up until the jig breaks over, and then I want to let it fall. See me drop my rod tip right there? So when that jig catches that branch or whatever in that brush pile, that root system, and it keep lifting. When it finally pops free, we want to drop our rod tip so that jig goes and falls as fast as it can. That's going to get the reaction bite we were explaining to you earlier. But on a non-windy day, just drag straight up. Now, if the wind was blowing towards me or blowing sideways, it would create an issue because it would create a bow in my line, which is going to greatly affect my sensitivity. It's going to make me have no feel for my bait when it's in these root systems, and then it becomes very hard to detect a bite versus when you bump into a root and all that just nasty issues, right? So what you want to do when the wind blows is just drop your rod down, and right there we're catching root. So only when I catch root or branch and my line gets tight, now I will lift up and slowly drag till it clicks over. I'll drop my rod right back down, go right back to dragging till I catch the next piece of the brush pile, which I just did right here. Lift up, drag over, and keep on dragging. Always, 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 whether it's in a brush pile, rock, grass, whatever you're fishing, once you get the bite, so if I'm dragging right here and I feel tick and I get a bite, I want to point my rod towards the fish, and I want to set the hook up into my right shoulder as hard and fast as I can, as you've seen in some of the examples we're showing you. All right, so to fish this jig over rocks, it's basically the exact same as fishing it through wood as far as brush piles or root systems are concerned. Get your cast lined up, make your cast. You know, we're fishing big rock piles. If you guys have watched this channel, you've seen these rock piles. I've shown them on 360 before. They're pretty neat. They're big concrete rock piles. But it's a good example. You can use this on riprap rock or chunk rock if you live in the Midwest where you get a lot of rock, or West Texas where you get a lot of rocky system lakes. These drop-offs and ledges can be great at place in the winter to catch fish. We all know that. And so the technique for doing that is just exactly the same. You want to make sure you're staying in contact with the bait. You want to just slowly, and look at how slow I'm crawling this jig. Starting to feel it come up on a rock out here. It's loading up a little bit. If it'll catch for us, it's kind of catching. It just slid right over that one. Now, one thing about the rock that's a little bit different than the brush is usually on the brush, it'll catch hard and pop off and shoot down. And that's really what you want to create, is that sudden change of direction, that sudden drop. Like right now, I've got a good catch. My rod's blowing up a little bit like we showed you earlier on the brush. We're going to ease it over there, pop, and then drop. Just a little pop and drop. That's going to create that reaction bite like we talked about. It's so similar to a chatterbait in a trap. When it hangs up in that grass and you pop it out of there, same deal, it's doing it again. Uh-oh. All right, now here comes time for the tip of the day right here. So I'm now wedged. I'm not going to pull. I haven't pulled on the bait very hard at all. First thing I'm going to do is lift and shake. It won't come out. I'm going to take slack and put the slack in my rod hand. I'm going to get a little bit of slack in my line here, and I'm going to go to plucking. Now, what I'm not doing, okay, is slingshot. I'm not trying to pop the bait out of there. All I'm trying to do is roll the head of that bait around and make the head change positions a little bit. And usually if you do that, it'll slide right out just like that right there. I'm going to tell you something, guys. If you'll learn the feel for that right there, 9 times out of 10, that head is just wedged into a crevice. If you'll change the head position by just plucking slack line, you don't want the line to be tight when you're plucking at all. You're not trying to slingshot it or pop it out of there. Change the head position, it'll roll and slide through there. That's what those jigs are designed to do. When you buy a good jig, this is my new prototype jig like we talked about. Man, I'm gonna tell you, these rocks, these big concrete blocks, you've seen images of them. They're just nasty. I've got plenty of jigs that are stuck up and down these rocks on this dam on this lake. And sure many others do too. And the brush piles out here are gnarly and nasty. And I've been throwing this new prototype jig through those rocks. I only got 2 of them, and one's right here and the other one's sitting right there. These are prototypes of the jig we're designing. It's going to be released in mid to late February. but those jig heads are designed to slide and roll and come through. The different angles on a jig head have purpose to get them through those crevices and angles and things that you can get wedged in. And so if you'll do that little trick I just showed you right there, that'll save you tons of money in jigs. But that's it, man. Just drag it through there. Let the structure put the action on the bait like we talked about. You don't need to shake it. You don't need to hop it. You don't need to impart action, especially in the winter. Slow, 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 sudden fall. That's the deal. Oh, talk to me. Oh, talk to me. Come here, you big girl. We just jig fishing, folks. Nope, we don't need no nets around here.
Nice size fish here.
Oh!
You did not boat with that thing.
Let's go.
You did not
Let's go! Boy. Oh, God. In the brush. Nope, he's not in the brush. Watch out. There we go, man. The new Versa jig that hasn't been released yet. Man, that jig head right there is, honestly, we've tweaked it a little bit a couple times in the prototyping phase already, but at this point, no more tweaks. There's one thing that I want to recess the eye a little more. The eye protrudes out a little further than I want it to be, so we're going to talk about that with the company that I'm working with on that. But other than that, as far as the shape of the head and it getting through cover, it literally couldn't be any better. I did not have one single hang-up. I mean, I had hang-ups, but I didn't have one single hang-up that I couldn't just pluck and stroll through there like I showed you guys. The head design is spot on, the width of it and everything else. It's pretty similar to some other jigs I fish, but it is a little bit wider at the base, which is going to help. I can't wait till we get a little bit of weather day and get some more time to spend on the water to actually try and catch fish with it, because I'm betting the way we design the head that the hookup position is also going to be incredibly good as far as how many of the fish get hooked in the top of the mouth with the way we design this head. We'll talk to you guys more about that as we release this jig, about what went into the head design, the science of what makes a good jig head versus a bad jig head. We'll get more in detail with you on that in the future as we get ready to release this jig. But man, really happy with this design. And you know, you guys got to see some cool old footage of us catching some big fish on a jig, just to kind of verify, hey, this has worked for years and years and years around East Texas. We've been catching big bass on a big jig. The first state record out of Lake Fork was caught on a jig in the wintertime. A fish named Valentine, caught by a Lake Fork guy, Larry Barnes, back in the 90s, was also caught on a jig in the wintertime in February. I think that was Valentine's Day. That's why they called her Valentine. But this is just time-tested, big bass approved technique. If you put it in your hands and get familiar with it and get good at bringing it through that cover and letting that fall happen over and over and over again, try to get as many falls in a cast as you can, man, I promise you, you're going to catch some bigger fish this winter. And I sure hope this helps all you guys out. Hey, we're back, man. It's been a while since we've been gone. We'll have more content for you guys next week. It's going to keep rolling. We're getting ready to roll into spring like we always do this time of year. And so the content's going to be coming out. Lots to look forward to. Can't wait to talk to you guys about all that as it develops. Most importantly, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really do appreciate that. And we will see you guys next time right here on your Lake Fork Guide.